It's a real privilege today to be able to have a conversation with Liv Wright. She's a very famous and well-known speaker, consultant, author, and lately is focused on two of my favorite subjects, getting older as a baby boomer, and also has a great blog called the Wise Boudoir. So I'm glad to be here, and since I like boudoirs and I'm getting older, it's a real pleasure.
Thank you so much. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
So continuing, why don't you tell me a little bit about what you're doing?
Yeah, I was very interested in what the people who are our age, sex, drugs, rock and roll generation, was very shy about talking about aging, sexuality, sensuality, like that. So I began this about 5 years ago to open up the dialogue. And what the responses I'm getting from people have been extraordinary. That in many cases, people are talking about their sexuality in a new way. Some people are talking about intimacy with families in a new way. And I'm very happy to be opening up the conversation.
Oh, that's really needed. I have a fascinating interest in this subject from several points of view, but one of them is the idea that aging is a choice. Our bodies change, but what it means and how we live and how we think is really an opportunity for us to both discover, to learn, and perhaps invent new ways of being and new ways of expressing ourselves.
You know, one of the things I am sensitive to is the fact that when you're turned on at 70, you feel the same way you did at 18. I'm not sure that we age in that our turned on bodies don't know we're 70.
That's right. Only the ego knows
Well,
how old we really are.
Yeah, but when you're turned on, you don't know that you're 70.
Well, you know, when you're turned on, you're not thinking about the future or the past.
My point. My point. So part of the challenge is to let yourself be turned on and not have the shame of, I'm too old to be turned on, I'm too fat to be turned on. I have MS. So the world of disability is such that people are thinking, well, now I'm disabled, can I be turned on? One of the blogs I wrote after I was on a conference call with the MS organization. And I was delighted to hear that occupational therapists can now fit devices for people to have sex with themselves, have solo sex. So the idea that I'm disabled, therefore I can't be turned on, au contraire, no. Even in this conversation we had, the conference call, I was hearing about using Velcro to whatever is your device to turn yourself on. Go to your occupational therapist and say, you know, I used to use blah, blah, blah before I was disabled. Can you make it possible for me to use it again? So the idea of being turned on should not be, discouraged if you're aging, if you're disabled, if you're have body shame, like that.
Well, I think my own experience is that sex is a fundamental expression of who we are, but it's also the ability to receive pleasure is probably as important as our capacity to give it.
Yeah, I think so. And some people, the idea of receiving pleasure, I'm not sure that we have enough, coaching, educating, mentoring about that. As babies, we know it. And I'm thinking that at some point when we begin to have those thoughts of, am I worthy? Am I lovable? All of that is associated with receiving that touch, affection, all of the reciprocity.
I think that's right. I mean, I find in my own experience, the older I get, the more I can appreciate that receiving is a gift, and it's not necessarily something that one needs to be worthy of or have a self-conversation about deserving.
Yeah.
But if you've grown up in the culture that you and I grew up in the age group that we're in, it was almost like not okay to be too happy, not okay to have too much.
Yeah. The word that struck me years ago when I was first thinking about this was the word vulnerability. Mm-hmm. And that is something that is scary in a certain way, but so important for receiving, for being sexual and sensual when you are for your whole life. But that thing about vulnerability is something that we may need more help with.
Well, you know, my main theme, I guess, or main focus of my work has been on this notion of a real-time world, and that the world is changing dramatically, and what we don't notice that we are also changing. And that when you live in a world that you can't trust your predictions, and things are changing faster than you can comprehend,
yeah.
and the complexity is overwhelming,
yeah.
and we don't have the control we would wish to have,
yeah.
if we ever had it.
Yeah.
When those sorts of realizations are becoming a day-to-day reality, the question I've been asking is, what do we need to learn to be able to succeed and navigate in that kind of a world? And chapter 1 in my book I'm writing has to do with what we're talking about in terms of vulnerability, because I call it surrender.
Yeah,
that
same thing.
Surrender is not succumbing.
Yeah.
It's not being beaten. It's actually the fundamental choice. And just as a baby is the most vulnerable child in the room, to be able to surrender is also to own our own power, and to be able to open ourselves up to the way it is without having to be afraid or to be particularly overpowered by it, but to simply appreciate the miracle of life and be grateful and participate in a way that we're fully self-expressed.
Yeah, I agree. The thing about surrendering with respect to the Wise Boudoir has to do with knowing that, well, for the boomers particularly, we are making this up. Those of us who will live to be 100 and beyond, you know, a large number of us are making this up. People have not done this before.
Well, and if we're dealing with an unpredictable world,
hello.
You know, yes, of course we're creating the reality.
Hello.
One of my favorite lines is, we want to clean it up before we die.
Yeah, I agree. So part of the adventure, part of the invitation I open up to my readers is this future that we are looking at has never been done before. Let's look around and see what others have been doing. For example, when I think about the heterosexual man-woman thing that happens when you're 70. Many of us are scared to touch each other. What's broken, what hurts, all of that. And I was so motivated when I heard gay people talk to me about the conversations they have. They talk about it. What do you like? What don't you like? And those of us who are heterosexual may have thought, let's assume she has a you-know-what. Let's assume he has a you-know-what. And we have taken so much for granted as heterosexuals that we end up not getting it on the way we might. The gay people, I'm learning, what do you like? So one of the blog I wrote was about the S&M people. They have an S&M club at Harvard. They call it the Harvard Munch. And they call it Munch because over meals people sit around and learn about what they like, what they don't like. But they all know that when you come to this gathering, you like quote-unquote kinky sex. But they talk about it. And those of us who are heterosexual and come from that time of, assuming we know, miss out on a whole bunch. So when I think about those of us who are boomers, 60, 50, 60, 70, whatever our age is, we came of sexual maturity at a time when you could take a lot for granted.
That's right.
And the young people do not.
I'm 75, and my father, I just celebrated the 100th birthday this last weekend. And while I must say I think he's retired from the playing field actively, he's still mentally, I think, still very, very much aware of his sexuality, or at least he reflects on it.
Yeah.
And I believe that life is not about, in fact, we've said this many times, it's not about the destination, it's the journey. And both metaphorically and in fact, I think that's one of the benefits of being older sexually, is that you can appreciate the process as much as the goal. And perhaps that's one of the things that makes it, I think, more enjoyable than it has been in my life. Liv, let me ask you a question, because I think we've been all aware of the revealing of misuse of power and sexuality in the workplace, and sexual harassment and all those sorts of things that are in the news so much these days. Why do you think that's occurring? That it's getting revealed, and we're dealing with it, I think, is wonderful. But in terms of the dynamic and how it connects to this cultural inhibitions that we've learned in our lives, do you see a connection?
You know what? If you had asked me this question a year ago, I might have answered it one way. Today, I am now, having read the history of sex, history of love songs, and about the brain, male-female brain, I want to propose that when a man, a boy child, gets his first erection, it's a surprise. And the boy may spend years trying to figure out the unpredictability of this thing called erection. It is possible what we're looking at when we're looking at all of this harassment going on and all of these men we are now aware of their, quote, non-consensual behaviors. I am thinking what we're looking at are guys who were never helped to answer the question, what do I do with this thing? These are maybe boys who are 13, 14, 15, trying to figure out what to do with this thing that happens, there I am in the principal's office being detained for so-and-so and so on, and I get a hard-on. What am I, I'm embarrassed, I'm ashamed, like that. So I think that even though the conversation now has to do with charges and assault and so on, what I saw in those books I read, took a look at, is that for millennia there has been a controlling entities, usually either morality, the church, or the state, the courts, to manage, to control the sexuality of all people. So we're looking at what the cost of what can happen when you can control. My conclusion, when I think about Bill Cosby, for example, I think about him having drugged women who were unaware of whatever the heck he was doing. That thing he was doing was what I would call a secret, and that he didn't want anyone to see, and that's why he drugged them. Do we know what his secret is? We do not. In the world I was mentioning before about Harvard, the term they use is kink, K-I-N-K, and you know what, the only sexuality that has been approved, authorized for millennia is heterosexual, penile, vaginal, for procreation. Now, that's one kind of sex, and there are many other kinds.
You know, a parallel theory, and then we should probably continue this conversation. I'd like to continue it in the future, is that I've been thinking about is that, you know, between about age 13 and 30, or maybe mid-20s, you know, it's all male hormones and female hormones, and that biologically, independent of whatever social situation we're in, it's all about dominance and surrender or succumbing between the sexes during those eras. And the men are competing to be the alpha male, and the women are competing to get the alpha male. And one way or the other, that social, that biological dynamic is never observed or reported or exposed for what it is. And as a consequence, we create a lot of this mythology and a lot of these practices that are pretty much counterproductive. I mean, one of my things that I've learned in my life is that anything I think I control that I don't control will control me, whether it's alcohol or sex or gambling, and that we become addicted to these counterproductive, self-destructive patterns that ultimately, at the end of the day, we pay a pretty high price for.
Agreed.
But Liv, it's been delightful. I really appreciate the time that you spent, and I'm looking forward to more conversation.
It was a pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you.